The morning sun painted the ancient streets of Jaipur in golden light as thousands of people gathered along the main road. Today was special. Today was the day of the Royal Heritage Festival that happened only once every year. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders while mothers held babies close to their chests. Everyone wanted the best view of what was about to happen. Marcus Chen stood among the crowd with his expensive camera hanging around his neck. He was 28 years old and had traveled all the way from California to see this famous festival. His travel blog had thousands of followers who waited to read about his adventures around the world. This was his first time in India, and everything felt new and exciting to him. The smell of street food mixed with incense filled the air. Vendors sold colorful flowers and small flags while children ran between the legs of adults trying to find the perfect spot to watch. Marcus looked around with wide eyes taking in every detail. The buildings were painted in bright pink and orange colors. Women wore beautiful saris that sparkled in the sunlight. Men had colorful turbans wrapped perfectly around their heads. A loud drum began to beat in the distance. The crowd became quiet, and everyone turned their heads toward the sound. The procession was beginning. First came the traditional dancers moving their bodies in perfect rhythm to the ancient music. Their feet moved so fast they seemed to barely touch the ground. Bells on their ankles made sweet sounds with every step. Behind the dancers came 3 massive elephants decorated with gold and silver cloth. Precious stones were sewn into the fabric that covered their huge bodies. The elephants walked slowly and proudly as if they knew how important this day was. On top of each elephant sat men in royal clothing waving to the cheering crowd. Marcus raised his camera and started taking pictures. He had never seen anything so beautiful and colorful in his entire life. The sounds and smells and sights were almost too much for his mind to handle. He wanted to capture every single moment, so his readers could feel like they were standing right beside him. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The royal guards appeared at the end of the street marching in perfect formation. These were not ordinary soldiers. These men came from families who had protected the royal family for hundreds of years. Their ancestors were brave Rajput warriors who fought in great battles long ago. The guards wore silver armor that reflected the bright sunlight like mirrors. Their uniforms were deep red and gold with intricate designs sewn by hand. Each man carried a curved sword at his side and held his head high with dignity and pride. Their mustaches were perfectly groomed, and their eyes looked straight ahead with complete focus. Leading the group was Arjun Singh Rathore. He was 35 years old and had been a royal guard for 12 years. His father had been a guard before him and his grandfather too. 7 generations of his family had served in this honored position. When Arjun walked, the ground seemed to vibrate under his strong steps. The crowd watched in complete silence, showing respect for these men who represented centuries of tradition and honor. Even the small children stopped talking and stared with amazement. This was not just a parade or entertainment. This was a sacred ceremony that connected the present day to the glorious past. Marcus felt his heart beating faster as the guards came closer. He had read about this festival in books and websites, but seeing it with his own eyes was completely different. The power and dignity of these men made him feel small and humble. He gripped his camera tighter, knowing that he was witnessing something truly special that most people would never see in their entire lives. The royal guards continued their march toward the main square, where the ceremony would reach its most important moment. The royal guards were now only 50 steps away from where Marcus stood behind a rope barrier. He could see every detail of their magnificent uniforms and the serious expressions on their faces. His hands trembled with excitement as he held his camera, ready to capture the perfect photograph. The crowd around Marcus pressed forward, trying to get a better view, but everyone stayed behind the red rope that separated them from the ceremonial path. This rope had been placed there by the festival organizers to keep a safe distance between the audience and the sacred procession. Everyone understood this rule and respected it completely. Marcus watched through his camera lens as Arjun Singh Rathore led his men closer and closer. The guard captain walked with such grace and power that Marcus felt mesmerized. The silver armor caught the sunlight, and created dancing reflections on the pink walls of the nearby buildings. The rhythmic sound of their boots hitting the stone street created a drumbeat that matched Marcus' heart. Suddenly, an overwhelming feeling took control of Marcus' mind. He needed to get the perfect shot for his travel blog. His followers expected amazing photographs that would make them feel like they were right there with him. The view from behind the rope was good, but not good enough. He needed to be closer. He needed to capture the intensity in the guards' eyes and the fine details of their ancient armor. Without thinking about the consequences, Marcus ducked under the rope barrier. The people next to him gasped and tried to grab his arm, but he was already moving forward. His camera was raised and ready as he stepped directly into the path of the approaching guards. The effect was immediate and shocking. Arjun Singh Rathore stopped so suddenly that the guard behind him almost bumped into his back. The entire formation came to a complete halt in the middle of the street. The drums stopped beating, and the traditional music faded away into silence. Marcus stood just 3 feet in front of the lead guard with his camera pointed directly at Arjun's face. The flash went off once, then, twice, then 3 times in rapid succession. The bright light reflected off the silver armor and temporarily blinded several people in the crowd. A collective gasp rose from the thousands of spectators. Children pointed and mothers covered their mouths in shock. Some people in the crowd started shouting angry words at Marcus. Others simply stood frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. Arjun Singh Rathore stared directly at this foreign stranger who had just broken centuries of tradition and protocol. His dark eyes were steady and calm, but behind them, Marcus could sense a storm building. The other guards looked to their captain for direction. Their hands moved slightly toward their ceremonial swords as they waited for orders. Marcus finally realized what he had done when he saw the expressions on everyone's faces. The excitement he had felt moments before turned into cold fear. He lowered his camera slowly but remained standing in the forbidden space between the guards and the crowd. The silence stretched on and on. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the street vendors had stopped calling out their wares. The entire festival had come to a complete standstill because of one thoughtless moment. Arjun continued to stare at Marcus while his mind raced through the options available to him. According to the ancient rules, any person who disrupted the sacred ceremony should be immediately removed and possibly arrested. The honor of his family and the dignity of the royal tradition demanded swift action. But something about this young man's face made Arjun pause. Behind the fear in Marcus' eyes, he could see something else. Something that reminded him of his own younger self many years ago. Arjun Singh Rathore felt the weight of 7 generations pressing down on his shoulders as he stared at the young foreigner who had dared to interrupt the sacred ceremony. His great-great-grandfather had died protecting the royal family during a terrible battle in 1857. His great-grandfather had served the Maharaja with complete loyalty for 40 years. His grandfather had taught him that honor was more important than life itself. The rules were crystal clear and had never been broken in over 400 years of this festival. Any person who disrupted the royal procession would be immediately seized by the guards and handed over to the local police. The sacred nature of this ceremony could not be compromised for any reason whatsoever. Arjun's hand moved slowly toward the golden handle of his ceremonial sword. The crowd watched this movement and understood what it meant. Several people started shouting at Marcus, telling him to move away quickly before it was too late. Some mothers pulled their children closer and turned their faces away from what they thought was about to happen. The other royal guards waited for their captain's signal. They had trained for situations like this, even though none of them had ever expected it to actually happen. Their muscles were tense and ready for action. The guard directly behind Arjun took a small step forward, preparing to grab the disrespectful tourist. Local police officers who had been watching the procession from the side streets began moving through the crowd toward the disturbance. They pushed past people trying to reach the scene as quickly as possible. Everyone knew that touching a royal guard during the ceremony was a serious crime that could result in months in prison. Marcus stood frozen in place as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He could see the anger in the faces of the people around him. He could hear them shouting words he did not understand, but their tone made their meaning clear. His heart pounded so hard, he thought it might burst from his chest. The camera felt heavy in his hands as he wondered if he should try to run or simply wait for whatever punishment was coming. He had read about cultural misunderstandings that led to serious legal problems for tourists in foreign countries. His mind raced through all the terrible possibilities. But Arjun was also thinking about something his grandfather had told him many years ago, when he was just a boy learning about their family history. The old man had said that true strength was not always about following rules blindly. Sometimes, the greatest warriors were those who could see beyond the surface of a situation and understand what was really happening. Looking into Marcus' eyes, Arjun saw something that surprised him. He did not see disrespect or mockery. He did not see someone trying to insult their traditions or make fun of their ceremony. Instead, he saw genuine wonder and fascination. He saw the same expression he remembered having as a child when his father first showed him the royal armor and told him stories of their brave ancestors. This young man had not come here to cause trouble. He had come here because he was amazed by what he was seeing. His actions were wrong, but his intentions seemed pure. Arjun remembered being young and making mistakes because his excitement had overcome his judgment. The seconds continued to tick by as the entire festival waited to see what would happen next. The tension in the air was so thick, it seemed hard to breathe. Instead of drawing his sword or calling for the police, Arjun Singh Rathore did something that shocked everyone watching. He took a deep breath and looked more carefully at the young man standing before him. The anger that had been building in his chest began to fade as he studied Marcus' face. What Arjun saw there reminded him of himself 25 years ago, when he was just 10 years old. His father had brought him to watch the royal procession for the first time. The young Arjun had been so excited and amazed that he had almost run into the street to get closer to the magnificent guards. Only his father's strong hand on his shoulder had stopped him from making the same mistake this tourist had just made. The memory made Arjun pause and think about what was really happening here. This was not an enemy trying to harm their tradition. This was not someone who wanted to disrespect their culture. This was simply a person who had been overwhelmed by the beauty and power of what he was witnessing. The crowd began to murmur louder as they waited for action. Some people shouted that the tourist should be arrested immediately. Others called for him to be thrown out of the festival. But Arjun raised his right hand in a gesture that everyone recognized. It was the signal for silence, and it worked immediately. The entire square became quiet except for the sound of birds singing in the trees above. Even the police officers stopped moving and waited to see what the guard captain would do. The other royal guards remained perfectly still, but their confusion was obvious on their faces. Marcus felt sweat running down his back despite the cool morning air. He wanted to apologize, but was afraid that speaking might make things worse. He had heard that showing fear was considered weakness in Indian culture, but he could not help the trembling in his hands. Arjun took one slow step closer to Marcus, then another. The crowd held its breath as the distance between the two men became smaller and smaller. Marcus could now see every detail of the guard's weathered face and the wisdom in his dark eyes. When Arjun was just 2 feet away, he stopped walking and spoke in clear English that surprised everyone, including Marcus. His voice was deep and calm, without any trace of anger or threat. "Do you understand what you have done here today?" he asked Marcus. His tone was serious, but not harsh. It was the voice of a teacher rather than an angry authority figure. Marcus nodded quickly and tried to find his voice. "I am very sorry," he whispered. "I did not mean to disrespect your ceremony. I was just so amazed by the beauty of everything I saw." The honesty in Marcus' voice seemed to reach something deep inside Arjun's heart. Here was a young man who had traveled thousands of miles to witness their ancient traditions. He had made a serious mistake, but it came from excitement and wonder rather than malice or ignorance. Arjun could have followed the rules exactly as they were written. He could have had Marcus arrested and removed from the festival. That would have satisfied the crowd and maintained the dignity of the ceremony. But something told him that this moment could become something much more important than simple punishment. The other guards watched their captain with growing confusion. They had never seen him hesitate like this before. The crowd was also becoming restless as they waited for the situation to be resolved quickly so the festival could continue. But Arjun was thinking about bigger things than just following ancient rules. He was thinking about what his ancestors would have truly wanted. Would they have wanted blind obedience to tradition, or would they have wanted their descendants to show wisdom and compassion when the situation called for it? Arjun Singh Rathore made a decision that would change both his life and Marcus' life forever. Instead of calling for the young man's arrest, he did something that no royal guard had ever done in the 400-year history of the festival. He chose compassion over punishment and understanding over anger. "You want to know about our traditions," he said to Marcus in a voice loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear. "Then I will teach you about them properly." The gasps from the crowd were even louder than before. People could not believe what they were hearing. A few elderly men shook their heads in disapproval while others looked curious about what would happen next. The police officers stopped moving forward and waited to see how this unusual situation would develop. Arjun began to speak about the significance of his uniform, starting with the silver chest plate that had been made by the same family of craftsmen for over 2 centuries. He explained how each piece of armor told a story about the brave warriors who had worn similar gear in battles long ago. The red and gold fabric represents the blood our ancestors shed, and the golden sun under which they fought, he said, while pointing to different parts of his uniform. These designs are not just decorations. They are symbols of sacrifice and honor that connect us to our past. Marcus listened with complete attention, forgetting all about his camera and his fear. He had never heard anyone speak with such passion and pride about their heritage. The guard's voice carried the weight of centuries as he described the meaning behind every detail of the ceremony. "The curved sword at my side belonged to my great-grandfather," Arjun continued. "He carried it during the Great Rebellion of 1857, when he defended the royal family against overwhelming odds. It has never drawn blood in anger, but it represents our eternal promise to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Other people in the crowd began moving closer to hear better. Many of them were local residents who had watched this festival every year, but had never learned the deep meanings behind what they were seeing. Children who had been restless and bored suddenly became quiet and interested. "The elephants you saw earlier are not just for show," Arjun explained. "In ancient times, they carried the royal family into battle and represented the strength and wisdom needed to rule justly. The dancers who came before us tell the stories of our victories and defeats through movements that have been passed down through countless generations." Marcus found himself asking questions about things he had noticed during the procession. Why did the guards hold their heads at exactly that angle? What did the different colors of the turbans mean? How long did it take to learn all the ceremonial movements? Arjun answered each question with patience and detail. He could see that Marcus' genuine curiosity was winning over the crowd who had been angry just minutes before. Some people began nodding approvingly as they realized this was turning into an unexpected cultural lesson for everyone present. The other royal guards remained in formation, but their rigid postures began to relax slightly as they watched their captain handle the situation with such wisdom and grace. They had followed Arjun into difficult situations before, but they had never seen him navigate something like this. As the conversation continued, more tourists in the crowd started asking their own questions about Indian history and culture. What had begun as a serious disruption was transforming into an impromptu educational experience that no one had expected. Arjun realized that this moment had the potential to build bridges between different cultures rather than create division and conflict. Instead of punishing one confused tourist, he could use this opportunity to help many people understand and appreciate the rich traditions of his homeland. The festival organizers, who had been watching nervously from nearby, began to smile as they saw the positive reaction from the crowd. As Arjun continued sharing the stories behind his ancient traditions, Marcus felt something changing inside his heart. He had traveled to many countries and seen many beautiful sights, but he had never experienced anything like this personal connection to living history. The guard captain was not just reciting facts from a guidebook. He was sharing pieces of his soul. Marcus put his camera away completely and gave Arjun his full attention. "I want to apologize properly," he said with sincere emotion in his voice. "I came here because I was amazed by your culture, but I acted without thinking about respect. I understand now that I was wrong, and I am truly sorry." The crowd could hear the genuine regret in Marcus' words, and many people began to soften their attitude toward him. They could see that he was not a bad person, just someone who had made an honest mistake because of his excitement and ignorance about their customs. Arjun studied Marcus' face and saw something that reminded him of his own son who was studying in college far away from home. This young American had the same eager curiosity and willingness to learn that made him proud of the younger generation. Maybe this disruption could become an opportunity instead of a disaster. "You made a mistake, but your heart was in the right place," Arjun said with a slight smile. "Instead of punishment, I offer you something better. Walk with us for the rest of our ceremony and learn about our traditions the proper way." The crowd murmured in surprise at this unprecedented invitation. Never in the history of the festival had an outsider been invited to join the royal procession. Some people thought it was inappropriate, while others found it exciting and innovative. Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. He looked around at the thousands of faces staring at him and felt both honored and nervous about this incredible opportunity. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "I do not want to cause any more problems." "You will walk beside me, and I will explain everything as we go," Arjun replied. "But you must promise to follow my instructions exactly and show proper respect for our sacred traditions." Marcus nodded eagerly and promised to do exactly as he was told. The other royal guards looked uncertain about this unusual development, but they trusted their captain completely. If Arjun believed this was the right thing to do, then they would support his decision. As the procession began moving again, Marcus walked carefully beside Arjun, feeling like he was living in a dream. The guard captain pointed out details about the buildings they passed and explained the historical significance of different landmarks along their route. The crowd followed along with growing interest as they learned things about their own city that they had never known before. Parents explained to their children what they were hearing, while tourists took notes and asked questions of their own. Arjun told Marcus about the great battles that had been fought to protect this city and the wise rulers who had built the beautiful palaces and temples they could see in the distance. He described the festivals and celebrations that had taken place in these same streets for centuries before either of them had been born. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the depth and richness of the culture he was experiencing. His travel blog usually focused on food and tourist attractions, but this was something much deeper and more meaningful. He was witnessing the living spirit of a people who had maintained their identity and traditions through centuries of change and challenge. Other tourists in the crowd began approaching them with questions about Indian history and culture. What had started as a personal conversation between two men was becoming a community discussion that brought people together across cultural and language barriers. By the time they reached the main temple where the ceremony would conclude, Marcus felt like he had gained not just knowledge but a true friend. Arjun had shown him kindness and patience that he would never forget for the rest of his life. Within hours of the festival ending, Marcus began writing the most important blog post of his entire career. He had over 50,000 followers from around the world who regularly read about his travel adventures. But this story was different from anything he had ever shared before. He wrote about his terrible mistake and how ashamed he felt for disrupting such a sacred ceremony. But more importantly, he wrote about Arjun Singh Rathore and his incredible act of kindness and wisdom. He described how the royal guard had chosen to educate rather than punish, and how that choice had transformed a moment of cultural conflict into a bridge of understanding. The blog post included dozens of photographs that Marcus had taken after being invited to join the procession. But the most powerful image was a simple picture of him walking beside Arjun, with both men smiling as they shared stories and knowledge. Marcus titled his post, "A Royal Guard's Wisdom Taught Me the True Meaning of Respect." He spent hours writing and rewriting every paragraph, To make sure, he captured not just what had happened, but how it had changed his perspective on travel and cultural exchange. When he published the post late that evening, he had no idea what was about to happen. Within the first hour, it received more comments and shares than any of his previous articles. People from dozens of countries began sharing their own stories about cultural misunderstandings and the importance of patience and forgiveness. By the next morning, the post had been shared over 10,000 times on social media. News websites picked up the story and published their own articles about the wise royal guard who had chosen compassion over punishment. Television stations sent reporters to interview both Marcus and Arjun about their unusual encounter. The story spread across India like wildfire. People in other cities began talking about the need for more cultural education for tourists visiting historical sites and festivals. Tourism officials realized they had been missing opportunities to create deeper connections between visitors and local traditions. International travel magazines contacted Marcus asking for more details about his experience and requesting interviews with Arjun. The royal guard found himself becoming an unexpected celebrity as people around the world praised his wisdom and kindness. The governor of the state issued a public statement commending Arjun for his handling of the situation and announced that he would be honored at a special ceremony the following month. The tourism department asked him to help develop new programs to educate foreign visitors about Indian culture and customs. Hotels and travel agencies in Jaipur began receiving calls from people who had read Marcus' story and wanted to visit the city to experience the Royal Heritage Festival for themselves. Bookings for the following year increased by over 200% as word spread about the meaningful cultural experiences available there. Other cultural festivals around India began adopting similar approaches to visitor education. Instead of simply expecting tourists to follow rules they did not understand, organizers started providing better information about the significance and proper etiquette for their events. The ripple effects extended far beyond India as cultural institutions in other countries began discussing how they could better welcome international visitors while still protecting their traditions. Museums and historical sites started developing new programs that combined respect for heritage with educational opportunities. Marcus received messages from travelers all over the world thanking him for sharing his story and inspiring them to approach other cultures with more humility and respect. Many people admitted they had made similar mistakes in the past, but had never received such a compassionate response. The story became a case study in several universities where students studying international relations and cultural anthropology analyzed how individual acts of understanding could create positive change on a much larger scale. Local newspapers in Jaipur published editorials praising both men for showing that cultural differences could be bridges rather than barriers when approached with the right attitude and intentions. 6 months after the festival, Marcus returned to Jaipur, but this time he came with an official invitation from the tourism department. The viral success of his blog post had opened doors that neither he nor Arjun could have imagined possible when they first met in that tense moment on the festival street. Arjun had been promoted to a completely new position called Chief Cultural Liaison Officer. His job was to work with international visitors and help them understand Indian traditions before they participated in cultural events. The government had created this role specifically because of the positive response to his handling of the situation with Marcus. The two men met at the same temple where the royal procession had ended months earlier. They embraced like old friends and spent hours catching up on everything that had happened since their last meeting. Both of their lives had changed in ways they never could have predicted. Marcus had been hired as an official cultural ambassador for the State Tourism Board. His job was to help create educational materials for foreign visitors and to serve as a bridge between Western tourists and Indian cultural sites. He would spend 6 months each year in India working on these projects. Together, they developed a comprehensive program called Respectful Tourism that was implemented at cultural sites throughout the region. The program included pre-visit orientation sessions where tourists learned about proper behavior and the historical significance of the places they would be visiting. They created video guides that were shown in hotels and available online for people to watch before attending festivals or visiting temples. These guides explain not just what visitors would see, but why these traditions were important to local people and how guests could show appropriate respect. The Royal Heritage Festival itself was redesigned to include interactive educational components. Instead of keeping tourists separated from the ceremony by ropes and barriers, the new format included designated areas where visitors could ask questions and learn about what they were witnessing. Arjun became a popular speaker at tourism conferences around the world. He traveled to countries like Thailand, Malaysia, and Mexico to share his approach to cultural preservation through education rather than exclusion. His message was that traditions became stronger when people understood and appreciated them, rather than simply observing them from a distance. Marcus used his growing platform to promote responsible travel practices. He wrote a series of articles about the importance of researching local customs before visiting foreign countries and the rewards that came from approaching other cultures with humility and respect. The success of their collaboration led to the establishment of the Indo-American Cultural Exchange Institute. This organization provided scholarships for young people from both countries to study abroad and learn about different cultures through immersive experiences rather than just academic study. Local businesses in Jaipur began benefiting from the increased tourism interest generated by their story. But more importantly, the quality of cultural interactions improved dramatically as visitors came prepared with knowledge and respect, rather than just cameras and curiosity. The festival that had once been a formal ceremony observed by tourists from behind barriers became an interactive celebration where people from around the world could participate meaningfully while still maintaining the dignity and sacred nature of the traditions. Other cities in India began adopting similar approaches to cultural tourism. The success in Jaipur proved that it was possible to welcome international visitors while still preserving the authentic character of local traditions. Universities began offering courses in cultural tourism management that used Marcus and Arjun's collaboration as a model for how individual encounters could create systemic positive change. Their friendship had evolved into a professional partnership that was making a real difference in how people from different cultures understood and respected each other. 5 years after their first meeting, Marcus and Arjun sat in a quiet cafe in Jaipur putting the finishing touches on their book manuscript. The book, titled When Cultures Collide: Finding Understanding in Unexpected Moments, would be published by a major international publisher and distributed in 12 languages around the world. Writing the book together had been an incredible journey of discovery for both men. They had interviewed dozens of people who had similar experiences of cross-cultural misunderstanding that had been transformed into friendship and learning. Their story was not unique, but it had become a symbol of hope for people everywhere. Marcus had moved to India permanently 2 years earlier when he married Priya, a local school teacher who shared his passion for education and cultural exchange. Their wedding had been a beautiful blend of American and Indian traditions, with Arjun serving as one of the honored guests. They were now expecting their first child, who would grow up understanding both cultures from birth. Arjun often reflected on that moment 5 years ago, when he had chosen compassion over anger. That single decision had changed not only his own life, but had created ripple effects that touched thousands of people around the world. He had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do was simply choose to understand rather than to punish. The annual Royal Heritage Festival had evolved into something much bigger than anyone had imagined possible. It was now a week-long celebration that included cultural workshops, artist exchanges, and educational programs for visitors from around the globe. The festival had become a model for other cultural events worldwide. The most meaningful addition to the festival was something called the bridge ceremony. This new tradition took place on the final day, when people from different countries were invited to share stories about their own cultural heritage and what they had learned during their visit to India. Marcus and Arjun were invited to speak at this ceremony every year. They would tell their story to the new generation of travelers and remind them that the most important thing they could pack for any journey was an open heart and a willingness to learn from their mistakes. Their book became a bestseller and was adopted as required reading in dozens of universities studying international relations, cultural anthropology, and tourism management. The success of the book led to speaking engagements around the world, where they shared their message of understanding and respect. The Indo-American Cultural Exchange Institute that had grown out of their collaboration now operated programs in 15 countries. Hundreds of young people had participated in exchanges that helped them develop the skills and perspective needed to build bridges between different cultures. Local schools in Jaipur began teaching courses about cultural sensitivity and the importance of treating visitors with patience and kindness. Students learned that being a good host meant helping people understand their traditions, rather than expecting them to know everything automatically. Marcus often thought about how different his life would have been if Arjun had chosen to follow the rules strictly that day. He would have been arrested embarrassed and probably would never have returned to India. Instead, he had found a second home, a life partner, and a purpose that gave meaning to everything he did. The story had inspired countless other people to approach cultural differences with curiosity rather than judgment. Social media was filled with posts from travelers who had learned from Marcus' mistake and made sure to research local customs before visiting new places. As they finished their book, Arjun and Marcus knew that their friendship had created something much bigger than either of them had ever imagined possible. They had proven that individual acts of kindness and understanding could change the world one heart at a time. The young tourist who had once disrupted a sacred ceremony and the royal guard who had chosen to teach rather than punish had become symbols of hope for anyone who believed that people from different cultures could not only coexist, but could enrich each other's lives through mutual respect and genuine friendship.